This is your daily reminder. God has not run out of mercy, not for you, not today. Welcome to the New Mercies Podcast. Welcome. Today is Friday, June the 19th, and maybe you are listening extra early today. I made sure this episode came out earlier on this Friday because in our church, we have just sent a mission team to Honduras to go and serve for the next week. We are partnering with a ministry called Hope Through Him. I'm going to link their website in this episode description if you want more information about Hope Through Him. It's a great mission organization. They do great with teams. If you are a pastor or a church that's looking to do a mission trip, this is a great partnership. We have been partnering with them for years. We absolutely love Hope Through Him. Do incredible work. But our team I just dropped some people off at the airport that's going to take off with that team. I'm excited and praying as they see the Lord working this week through the team. So maybe, and the reason I set this episode out a little earlier today, my team's sitting in an airport right now, so I wanted to make sure they had the ability to listen extra early. So I'm glad that you joined us. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, do that and all that stuff. Anyway, so here's what I want to say. We're in Hebrews chapter 9 today. That's our reading plan. I've got my trusty yellow note here that before I started recording, I read this chapter again and I wrote down some thoughts. Here's what we are talking about this week. We're in the tabernacle series. We're looking at the tabernacle. This Sunday, I'm preaching Exodus 25 through 27, all 3 chapters. How am I going to do that? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to reference the New Testament because the New Testament references the Old Testament. In Hebrews, I love the book of Hebrews, especially if you understand any type of Jewish culture and their processes, their systems. You understand the book of Hebrews matters a lot. Hebrews it's one of the greatest places that helps reveal the hidden truths of the Old Testament. As we get ready to prepare to talk about the tabernacle, I don't want us to do a history lesson on the tabernacle. I want the tabernacle to teach us. I want it to proclaim the truth of the gospel to us. I want it to share everything about who Christ is and how we can get closer to this Jesus and how we can get closer into the presence of God. Guess what? Hebrews 9 is here for the rescue. I hope and pray you read it today. Maybe you've already read it. Maybe you're about to read it. I'm going to end up reading 2 verses. I've actually recorded this already before today, and it took me a minute, and I had to re-record it. So I do know I wasn't planning on reading any, but verses 6 and 7 are the 2 verses I'm going to read in just a minute. But before I get there, if you're reading chapter 9 of the book of Hebrews, let me tell you this. The first 5 verses are the furnishings that are found in the tabernacle. Okay, it does say earthly place of holiness. That's the way that it's termed, so that we understand it was a temporary place. In the Old Testament, there were 2 temporary dwellings or places of worship. One of those was the tabernacle. The other was the temple. The tabernacle is what we are talking about. It was the first place of worship for the presence of God, his house, right? That was his house. It's the place that was built, and all of this will point to Christ. It's amazing and awesome. First 5 verses, you will see in chapter 9 a lot of the furnishings. You recognize some of them we haven't gotten to yet. For instance, there was the bread of presence, the table of presence, that's in there, the lampstands in there. We've talked about all of those things already, but there was a golden altar. We haven't talked about that yet. That's coming in next week. But you see the furnishings in verses 1 through 5. So very important. Talks about the curtains, talk about the way everything was separated. Then verses 6 and 7. Let me read these 2 verses to you today so that we understand something really awesome. Here's what the Bible says, Hebrews 9, verse number 6. These preparations having thus been made, the priest go regularly into the first section, performing their ritual duties. But into the second only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people. So here's what I want to tell you. So the first 5 verses, we see the furnishings of the tabernacle. The verses 6 and 7, we see the ritual services that take place in the tabernacle. So here's, you know the scene, right? So there's the Holy of Holies that has the Ark of the Covenant in it with the mercy seat on top of it, a slab with 2 cherubim angels that are everything's laid in gold, and they're on top of it. And you couldn't go and see this. Everybody couldn't go and look at it. In fact, not even the priests could go and look at it. Only one high priest, one day in a year. That day was called the Day of Atonement. Now, here's where I really began to kind of struggle and pray. I thought, Lord, do I need to explain all of the Day of Atonement? Because the more you understand about the Day of Atonement, the more you can understand about the riches of all of this text. But I'm not going to share it on the podcast today. That's in a coming episode. I think it'll fit better in a couple of weeks. But the Day of Atonement is the day once a year where the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, but it says he had to take blood with him and sprinkle it on the mercy seat for his sins and for all of the unintentional sins of the people of God. So what that means is any sin at all, everything that did not align with God's purposes, his ways, that broke the law, every single sin was covered on the Day of Atonement. But it had to be blood on that slab of that mercy seat. For those Bible scholars that maybe, I'll even give you a little hint. If you go into the New Testament and you read whenever Jesus rose from the dead, there's an account where it says somebody goes into the tomb and they see there's two angels sitting at the place where his body lay, one at the head, one at the feet, because that's where the real mercy seat is. That's where the blood was shed. Absolutely beautiful and awesome. I want to preach that, but I'm going to stop. Here's where we go. So if you read verses 6 and 7, it talks about the services that would take place and how the high priest could go one time a year into the Holy of Holies. The regular people of Israel couldn't see the presence of God. They couldn't see even the furniture that was the presence of God. Not even the priests could do that. They couldn't peek their head past that curtain. Only the high priest, and only once a year could he go in and do that. Now verses 8 through 10, we're pressing on in Hebrews 9. Verses 8 through 10 is the function of the tabernacle. Okay, so you start out with the furnishings of the tabernacle. You start out with the services in the tabernacle. Now you go to the function of the tabernacle, the reason it was existing. Here's what I love. It explains to us, verses 8 through 10, that the tabernacle is a parable for the future. The tabernacle, what that means is the tabernacle is pointing everything to Jesus. That's what it was doing. I said a moment ago, if you are looking at the Old Testament, it's this truth that you just can't seem to crack the code of. And you look at the New Testament, and it's the code, it's the key to unlock the code. You can see now the truth is revealed in the New Testament of the deep hidden truths of the Old Testament. The mysteries of the Old Testament are solved and explained in the New Testament. And it's all pointing to Jesus, every bit of it. The parable of the tabernacle, which we will talk about as I preach this series, the tabernacle was all a storyline that pointed to the person of Christ. And it will explain that in Hebrews chapter 9. I almost wanted to wait until a couple more weeks to do Hebrews 9, but I thought it was good to go ahead and get this in our heads so that we don't miss out on it. So the parable is everything in the tabernacle it's a story to tell who Jesus is and what he's doing. It's a real thing. The tent was absolutely real. Every part was real. Every stitch was real, 100% of it. But it was all so that we could understand who this Christ is and what he has done for us. Verses 11 and 12 then explain the heavenly tabernacle, where we will be with him one day. Jesus appeared as the high priest. Good things have come. I love the end of verse number 10. I want to read the end of verse number 10 real quick. It says, I'll read all of verse number 10, but deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation. Now, a lot of that has to do with some sacrifices and some different things in verses 9 and 10. But verse 10, it makes a statement at the very end that says the time of Reformation. What Hebrews is saying is now is the time. Jesus is the hinge where all of it changed. Yes, we had this, they had to go do these sacrifices. I want to spend a moment here and explain a couple of things. One, if you go into the Levitical law, what you will find is there was a sacrifice of what was called the red heifer. That was a red cow that was had no white hairs on it, just fully red hair. If you go, in fact, and look up some stuff right now about the red heifer, you'll see some stuff going on in Israel right now about the red heifer. It is all to go back to these moments in the Old Testament. What the red heifer sacrifice was, this is talking about cleansing the conscience. So the sacrifices that would happen in the tabernacle could not cleanse the conscience because that was the inside of a man. But here's what was going on. They would have a couple of different sacrifices that would take place. One, an individual would take an animal, a lamb, a spotless lamb, a goat, a bull, a ram, whatever, and they would have that sacrificed at the tabernacle. Well, there was that was to pay for the sins of the people. Well, there was something else that took place in Jewish history, that there was the red heifer. That was a ceremonially cleansing people. So if you wanted to be ceremonially cleansed, you had to do so with the ashes of the red heifer. Now, without getting too much into the weeds here, I want to explain just a touch that will also connect to another place in the New Testament. Do you remember when Jesus had a conversation with Nicodemus? That conversation, Jesus made a statement to him that said, "You are a leader and teacher of Israel, and yet you don't understand these basic truths." He talked about water cleansing and spirit cleansing. Well, he was referring to, there was a deal. So let me give you just a basic example. I'm always like, explain it to me like I'm 5, right? So here's what would happen. So if you were to touch a dead body, like a carcass of an animal or something, a dead body, you would be ceremonially unclean, right? So you could not go into worship if you had touched the carcass of a dead body. Now, but here's what you could do. You could go wash your hands and you would be sanitary, but you still were not cleansed by the law in order to worship with the believers. So what you had to do was you had to become ceremonially cleansed. How did you do that? Well, they would take a red heifer, they would take him outside the camp and slaughter it, putting on the ceremonially cleansing prayers and those kind of things. Then they would take the red heifer and they would set him on an altar and they would burn it all the way to ashes. They would put the ashes of the red heifer into a basin, to a bowl with water, and then that would be purification water to cleanse for ceremony, to cleanse, to be ceremonially clean. So here's what you would do. If you were to touch a carcass, yes, you would wash your hands, and so that you would be physically clean, but then you would have to go get washed or sprinkled with the water from that sacrifice so that you could be ceremonially cleansed. When Jesus says, how do you not understand this, Nicodemus? You got to be cleansed by water. We're not talking about just being sanitary. We're talking about being washed, being ceremonially clean, where you can go into the presence of God. You couldn't go into the presence of God if you weren't ceremonially clean. So here's what I say. All that, that's a lot, and I know we just did a massive explanation on something that maybe you say, well, why does that really matter? Because of what happens next. It explains our heavenly home, that it is the tabernacle, the heavenly tabernacle. Then it goes from verses 13 through the end of the chapter, all the way through verse 28, and it explains how Jesus is the better sacrifice. He is everything the tabernacle did. He's everything the tabernacle was. He's everything that the law prescribed. He could wash, he could cleanse, he was the one who went willingly. You know, every single animal that was taken to sacrifice did not go willingly. They were demanded by the law. They had no willing conscience to go and be sacrificed. They were just taken and led. An animal doesn't realize where it's being led to, right? So they would take these animals, and they were unwilling. It wasn't like they were doing this on a purpose, for a reason. Jesus willingly laid down his life because of the conscience of man. An animal couldn't clear the conscience of man. Jesus can. There's a difference we have now with the Spirit of God within us than the Old Testament saints did. They didn't have the conscious Savior that we have. Now they could trust and believe in him one day, but for us, we are on the other side of that. So this text is helping us understand Jesus is the better sacrifice all the way around. He cleanses us in every way. Jesus is the way we get into the presence of God. Ceremonially cleansing us is Jesus. We're washed by him. He's the one that cares for us. He's the one that loves us. He's the one that willingly died for us. I love Hebrews chapter 9. It is absolutely beautiful. It talks about the furnishings of the tabernacle. It talks about how the functions and the use and the services of the tabernacle. The reason the tabernacle pointed us to Jesus, now it talked about Jesus at the end of the chapter. I love this place because it points everything to Jesus. Today, here's my question to you. As a believer, is everything in your life pointing to Jesus? That's the question I've got. That's the challenge for today. Point your life to Jesus.